Welcome to Child and Crime, Courtroom Confidential, a gripping true crime channel where a complex world of criminal law and child protection takes centre stage. I'm B, an experienced child protection and criminal lawyer with experience of both defence and prosecution work. And this channel delves into the intricate details of real-life cases, offering a unique perspective that only someone deeply entrenched in the legal system can provide. Our mission is to shed light on the often shadowed facets of justice, exploring the stories behind the headlines with a focus on victim advocacy, prevention, and the pursuit of justice and truth. So why don't you join us each week as we unravel the mysteries of crime and justice, providing insightful analysis and fostering a community dedicated to understanding and preventing crime, especially when it involves our society's most vulnerable members. Today we're going to be looking at the timeline in relation to the Naziah Harris case. And for those of you who are new to that case, or who haven't watched my previous videos, this story begins with Naziah Harris, who was 13 at the time, going missing on the 9th of January of 2024. Her auntie's on and off again partner and father of her 5 children, Jarvis Butts, has been charged with Naziah's murder. And a preliminary hearing took place in January, at which the judge confirmed that the matter ought to go forward to trial. And the evidence in that hearing was quite astounding, considering that Naziah has never been found, so this is a no-body prosecution. But that sets the stage a little, and then I think we need to dive right in to the timeline. So we begin with the 22nd of November of 1984, when some might say that evil was born into this world. Jarvis Butts was born, and that makes him 42 currently. On the 8th of June of 1993, Shannon Harris, Naziah's aunt, and Jarvis Butts' on and off again partner, was born, making her currently 32. And the next instalment takes us forward in time to the 31st of October of 2005, when Jarvis was sent to prison for raping a girl under 13. And that's something that we know will become a pattern of offending behaviour. He was sentenced on that occasion to 10 years in custody. Now, Naziah herself was born on the 16th of September of 2010 to her mother, Kenyatta Harris, also known as Lady, who is a substance user and a painter and decorator by trade. And her father, Mervyn Jennings, who was also in the building trade, worked with Lady and was married but having an affair with Lady at the time that Naziah was conceived. Now, in around 2012, Jarvis Butts, who was then aged 28, and Shannon Harris, then aged 19, met. And that's according to Shannon's own testimony during the preliminary hearing. Now, I need to just take a step back here and say that the majority of the material that you will find in this timeline relates to information that has come directly from the preliminary hearing and is the evidence upon which the prosecutors are intending to prosecute this case. Where for any reason I step away from that because there is a vast amount of material floating around on social media. If I think it's particularly relevant, I'll include that, but make it clear that I'm doing so from a social media source and that that information hasn't been verified. Because we're looking at this case through a legal lens, we need to make sure that we are predominantly sticking to the facts as they are presented in any court hearing, but also that we consider all potential theories and any areas where, for example, law enforcement may have not followed all reasonable lines of inquiry, or where information has come to light which might provide a defence, and things along those lines. And the other thing I really ought to have said right at the beginning is that I hope you've got your cup of coffee ready and waiting so that we can get cracking and delve in. So, on the 16th of June of 2013, Shannon Harris and Jarvis Butts have their first daughter, Janiah. Now, I wouldn't usually name minors that are involved in the proceedings other than the victim themselves, but this family have been so widely publicised and references to the other children made that I don't think that it's particularly prejudicial at this point to name them by just the first names, and it will make things make a little bit more sense. So, according to the records that I could find, Jarvis was released from prison in March of 2014, which clearly can't be correct because in the period 2012 to 2013, he met and had a child with Shannon Harris. One theory that I would posit is that he was released on parole and then was recalled because he breached his parole conditions after having met and impregnated Shannon. And then the next stage in the timeline is moving slightly away from Jarvis Butts, and I do this for a reason. So on the 24th of March of 2015, Eric Bethel Gamble, who is Annette Harris's brother and Nazia's great uncle, is convicted of attempted rape of a girl under 13. It's believed that SA is a generational problem in the Harris family, and that Annette herself had her first child born out of SA by one of her brothers when she was 11, although I can't corroborate that element of the information. I know that the conviction of Eric Gamble is correct. I've seen it with my own eyes on the registered offender site for Michigan. And there is, unfortunately, a quite worrisome TikTok video where Mr. Gamble has a beer in hand, is sat on a window ledge, and is behind Nazia whilst she's creating a TikTok video where she's dancing, and he grabs her from behind. And whilst, if this case were not involving offences of SA, and we didn't know that Eric Gamble was an RSO, we might look at it and think that's just the act of a loving uncle. In actual fact, the manner in which he grabs her points to something a little bit more uncomfortable happening, and it's clear that Nazia, from the look on her face, is really uncomfortable with the way that he does grab her. So this young girl is surrounded by sex offenders and people who have suffered SA and trauma during their lives. In 2015, Jarvis Butts is the subject of a Child Protective Services case involving his ex-girlfriend and her daughter. And that case involved allegations of inappropriate behaviour by Jarvis. And then on the 22nd of February of 2017, Shannon and Jarvis's second daughter, Jaliyah, who they always refer to as Juju, is born. Now, in 2018, so 3 years after the initial Child Protective Services case, Jarvis Butts is the subject of another Child Protective Services referral, again involving an ex-girlfriend, although it isn't clear whether it's the same ex-girlfriend or a different one. And in that same year, 2018, Jarvis and Cordell Wright meet whilst they're working at Frank's Auto Shop on East Warren Avenue and Neff Avenue in Detroit. And I give the details of the address only because there are 3 in a very small area. So if, like me, you choose to go and look up on Google Maps where everything is that relates to the case. Just typing in Frank's Auto Repair Shop wouldn't help unless you have the road references. And this is all public record because it was part of the preliminary hearing, which was televised live. On the 11th of September 2018, Shannon and Jarvis have their third child, their first boy, Saeed. And Eric Gamble was released on the 14th of December of 2018. We know from their individual testimonies at the preliminary hearing that Jarvis Butts met Latricia Johnson, one of his many girlfriends, and Tashiana Davis, who he became engaged to in 2023. On the 26th of September of 2021, Shannon and Jarvis's fourth child, another son, Lasai, was born. Now, there is a very telling post on Shannon's FB page on the 29th of May of 2021 at her baby shower gender reveal, when she was describing herself all the way through as teen boy all the way. And then after the reveal, she said this: "If it was going to be another girl, I was going to leave it at the hospital." Now, that's a very strange thing to say, some might think. But I have a theory that by that point, she was most definitely aware that there were concerns around Jarvis's behaviour with children in the family. And she was certainly aware of his history as an RSO because he told her at the beginning of the relationship. So it may be that the comment indicated that she didn't want another girl because she knows very clearly what they are at risk of suffering from their father. And I don't say that flippantly or in an offhand way. There were allegations made at the preliminary hearing by Marquita's daughter. Now, Marquita is Shannon's twin sister, and her 9-year-old daughter gave evidence, which obviously wasn't televised because she's 9 years of age, but reporters who were in the courtroom gave a rundown of what her evidence entailed. And it was that Jarvis had been seen by this girl essaying Naziah when she walked into a room at the shop and Naziah was sat on his knee with no panties on. And we can all use our imagination there as to what may have been happening. And that he had also essayed another one of her cousins, that being one of his own daughters, who was also around 9 years of age, and that he had propositioned the young lady who was giving evidence, but she had told him no and asked him to take her home. And I think it goes further than simply that Shannon was aware of what was going on. The fact that Marquita's child was very clear in her answer to him and didn't appear hugely shocked by what she had seen, it would suggest that Marquita has coached her children in how to deal with any advances made by Jarvis. Now we move on to 2021. And at that time, Jarvis's colleague at Frank's Auto Repair Shop, Cordell Wright, was taken into custody, and he served a prison sentence until 2023. Now, it's not clear from the evidence that was given at the hearing whether Jarvis continued to work at Frank's during that period, but one must assume that that's the case, without any information to the contrary. And in February of 2022, an allegation was made by a group of children that at a family party, Jarvis had offered them money to do inappropriate things to him. Now, this was Janiah's 9th birthday party, and the child who initially reported the advances of Jarvis is one of their cousins, one of Janiah's cousins, who was not regularly exposed to Jarvis, so it came as a shock to her. And she told Shannon directly that Jarvis had touched her inappropriately while she was in the basement playing with the puppies. And we know from Facebook posts that Shannon's dog has on occasions had puppies, so that would make sense. The next day, Shannon, having spoken to her aunt, who advised her to contact the police, she also told Annette, her mother. And Annette simply said, "Bring the children round to me and I'll speak to them." And she then said that the children told her they had lied because they were mad at Jarvis for not giving them any money. Now, later on, Kiwana has stated that one of the children, so Kiwana is one of Shannon's cousins, I believe. She later stated that one of the children living with Annette and Shannon had confided in her about the inappropriate things that Jarvis was doing at the house. Now, she doesn't indicate which of the children that was. But Kiwana also said in an interview, not with police incidentally, this was an interview on a YouTube platform, that Lady Naziah's mother went through the same thing as Naziah at 13 and had said to Kiwana that she couldn't fight those demons that were chasing her, and that this sex stuff, it keeps on chasing me, and now it's got my baby. So in the midst of all these allegations, in April 2022, Janelle, who is related to Annette, and Kiwana, who is, I believe, a cousin of Shannon and Marquita, although I'm not 100% certain, and potentially other family members, that element's not clear, made 7 CPS reports, so 7 referrals to Child Protective Services, indicating their concern that Naziah was being essayed by Jarvis, who was a registered SO. These referrals were subject to no further action. Now, I don't have the papers in relation to those matters, obviously, because they are Child Protective Services matters and they won't release information in the same way that criminal justice organisations will. But from my own professional experience in child protection law, a significant weakness in the system in the UK and in America is that if somebody makes a referral into Child Protective Services, a social worker will speak to the child and they'll also speak to their main carers. And if no allegation is made directly by the child, particularly once they're verbal, then it's often the case that they will finalise the case with no further action because the allegations aren't substantiated. This is a huge problem when, as in this case, Naziah has been groomed and no doubt told by Jarvis that this was their secret, and that he will have no doubt ensured through coercion or threats that she knew she must not disclose what was happening or she'll face consequences. And it's also potentially the case that, given Annette's reaction to the allegations made by the other child at Janaya's birthday party, that Shannon or Annette may have said something similar to the social worker on this occasion, namely that Naziah was telling lies or was prone to telling lies, or indeed had confirmed to them that she was making it up. They may also have made comments similar to those that they made on social media when she went missing, at which time they called her fast, which is absolutely heartbreaking that they're prepared to refer to a 13-year-old child in that way. A 13-year-old child who has been groomed and abused for a significant period of time. But why would Shannon and Annette cover this up when speaking to a social worker? I suspect that many of you will ask yourselves that question. And the answer is somewhat complex, much in the same way that it's a very complex question when you're trying to understand why a victim may stay with a domestic abuser. And here we have a family where, as far as we are aware, SA is a generational issue. And so the family as a whole tend to try and keep everything about that generational system of SA a secret, including the current child of the family suffering, unfortunately. Now, I posit that only because since the preliminary hearing, Shannon has been recorded and in fact streamed live on the Mark DeAndre 7 Mile radio show, having a conversation with a relative, Roxy, during which she confirmed that she was aware that Naziah was pregnant. And so it's likely that other family members were also aware of it, given the very close relationship between Shannon and her mother and Shannon and her twin sister. And if they were aware that she was pregnant, it is likely, particularly given the background of complaints being made, that they were aware of what was happening to Naziah and at whose hands that was happening. Now, going back to the Child Protective Services element of this, where the allegation relates to an 11-year-old child, as she was at that point, and the alleged perpetrator is an RSO, having served 10 years for rape of a girl under 13, then at a bare minimum, she ought to have been subject to what in the USA is a safe sane kit, or in the UK we call it a rape kit. And there is a potential that, given her young age, that would have demonstrated some corroboration for the allegations that had been made by the family members. I don't know whether that was carried out. I would hope that it was, but I think it's unlikely that it was, given that the matter was closed with no further action. Although I am aware that on many occasions, even with youngish children, there may be no physical indications of what has happened to them. Moving on to September of 2022, when Naziah was 11 or 12, this is the first time frame when evidence from the digital devices, phones, etc., was available that was shared at the preliminary hearing of Jarvis's behaviour directly towards Naziah, including grooming, extremely explicit and inappropriate messages, the sending of photographs, and his gaslighting of her whenever she spoke about emotions. He groomed her to the point where she believed they were in a consensual relationship, even though it's absolutely clear that she cannot consent. She's 13, 11 or 12 at that time. He's convinced her that that's what is happening and that it's perfectly okay for them to be having an intimate relationship. It isn't an intimate relationship. It is plain and simple SA. But that's what he's convinced her of. And when she does talk about emotions and the emotions of their relationship, he gaslights her. He only engages in the conversation at the point that we begin to see the evidence when it relates to sexual activity. That tells me a couple of things. It tells me that the grooming started much earlier, and the context of those messages, which we'll look at in more detail when we go through the actual evidence itself that was presented. It's clear that the sexual, intimate element of that, in air quotes, relationship was well underway at that point. So not only did the grooming start earlier, but they were kind of embedded into the process of intimate relations by the point that the evidence is available to the trial. And that may be because he's changed phone provider or something, and they don't know what his previous one was. I don't know what the answer is. That's just when the evidence is available that they presented. And of course, the fact that Jarvis has been in Nazia's life since she was 2 years of age, and he has a history of SA of a 4-year-old to whom he gave chlamydia. That was one of the ex-girlfriend's referrals to Child Protective Services. It's likely from a what is his age range of preference that this started when Nazia was much younger. Now, on the 27th of January of 2023, Shannon and Jarvis's 5th child, another son, Wanye, was born. And in 2023, we also know that Jarvis became engaged to Tashiana Davis. That's one of his girlfriends, and he has no children with her, and nor do they live together. And he always provides his home address as Wilshire Drive, where he lived with a girl called Angel. In the spring of 2023, Jarvis and Cordell, on Cordell's release from prison, open an auto repair shop of their own as partners at 9000 Connor and Harper in Detroit. And on that plot is the auto repair shop and a gas station, a Citgo gas station. And during the summer of 2023, so when the business is in its very early days, Cordell and Jarvis worked on a red Jaguar that belonged to Cordell's son's maternal grandmother. So he had a son with the daughter of the red Jaguar's owner. Now, they went and worked on that car on the maternal grandmother's driveway in Ypsilanti. And that is when the sister of Cordell's son's mother, so Cordell's son's auntie, Talacia Moore, who also lived at that address, first met Jarvis. And that becomes important later on in the story. In September of 2023, Naziah told Jarvis that she had missed her period. She told him that she took a pregnancy test, but that it was negative. Now, if we sidestep out of the court evidence and into the realm of social media, the conversation that was live streamed between Roxy and Shannon heard Shannon say that she had given Naziah a pregnancy test and that it had had 2 lines, but one was very faint, and so she told Naziah that it was negative. Now, anybody who has done a pregnancy test knows that that isn't the case. If it shows a line, you are pregnant. There can be many reasons why the line may be faint, and that can be because it's too early to give a strong reading of the hormone related to pregnancy, or it can be, for example, that it's an ectopic pregnancy where the fetus is growing outside of the womb. Or that the fetus hasn't embedded properly, and many other reasons. But usually it's because it's too early to give a strong reading. She also texted him in the days and weeks after, talking about the fact that her stomach was hurting, and at one point texted him that he needed to bring her the supplies, nobody knows what those were, because doing gym with this baby is really difficult. So it's clear that Jarvis was aware, as was Naziah at that point, that she was pregnant. So that little clip on the previous slide was a TikTok video by Naziah where she's dancing, and to me, and certainly the same can be said for Tutti Uncensored, it's blatantly obvious that Naziah is pregnant. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments whether you think that she does, in fact, look clearly pregnant. Because from my perspective, I defy any family member to stand there, watch that video, and then say they didn't know that she was pregnant. But let's move on to the 9th of January, the fateful day when Naziah went missing. And first of all, let's focus in on the school day itself. So we know that Naziah was diligent, good student. She was doing well academically, and she didn't ever miss school. So at sometime before 7:30 on the 9th of January, Naziah gets up. She gets dressed. She puts on light blue jeans, a pair of Nike trainers, a white jumper, a black hoodie. It's January, it's cold. And then she puts on a Rugrats puffer jacket with a fur-lined hood. And she has on her clear framed glasses, and she has her hair braided into 2 puff balls. "7:30 comes around and Naziah is at school. She arrives and starts her school day. Now she attends J.E. Clark Preparatory Academy on Bremen Street. Now there were some messages sent between Naziah and Jarvis using the school issued tablet. And I will say at this point that if you see screenshots of this evidence, you may notice that it says 1421 and so forth. The time zone is incorrect. So when it's corrected to be local Michigan time, the messages start at 9:21 a.m., not 14:21. So at 9:21 a.m., Naziah sends a message to Jarvis that says, "Don't forget to be there before 3. I will let you know when I'm leaving the school, and if you're not there, I will wait." Now that tells us that there was a conversation before, because you don't start a message with "don't forget" if you've not already had a conversation about it. So it's clear that they've agreed prior that Jarvis is going to pick Naziah up from school. At 9:22, Naziah then sends a message that says, "Send OK if you've seen the message, so I can delete your number." And then a minute later at 9:23 a.m, Jarvis replies, "OK." There are no further messages between them using any device ever again. Now, Naziah, on the 9th of January, had a substitute teacher, and that teacher gave evidence that Naziah appeared upset during the school day and had laid on the floor in a fetal position and asked to see the counsellor, but that the counsellor didn't come up to see her. Now, to me, that's a failure on the part of the school. There is no clear communication back from the counselling service that nobody's going to come and see Naziah. And at no point did the substitute teacher take the initiative and think, well, the counsellor hasn't been, so I better find out what's up with this child and establish if there's anything that I need to do. And so it seems that Naziah was failed by the school on that day, and the judge certainly was of that opinion during the preliminary hearing. During the school day, she also took a selfie with the school-issued tablet, and that's the last known photograph of her. And it shows her beautiful braided puffball hair. You can see the white jumper, you can see the black hoodie, and you can see the clear framed glasses. And it's very haunting because Naziah is waving hello at the camera with a big smile. But in truth, she's waving goodbye to the world. And that breaks my heart. Cordell Wright gave evidence at the preliminary hearing that both he and Jarvis were working at the shop that day. But he recalled that Jarvis was out for part of the day. Now, it was likely that he was at court because we know from the evidence given by Tashiana Davis, his fiancée, that she took him to court to hand himself in on a warrant, but that it got postponed to the 7th of March. Cordell also gave evidence that he himself was on a tether, which in the United Kingdom we'd call an electronic monitoring device or a tag, with a curfew at his home address between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. each day. And that was in place between the 14th of March of 2023 and the 28th of March 2024. So that's going to have been kind of post-release conditions following his release from custody. He also said in his evidence that he sometimes saw Jarvis's kids and niece at the shop sporadically, as well as occasionally seeing Jarvis's sister, Tiwana. And he said that the kids would sometimes spend the day there, and they'd come to do chores or get some money. And I suppose the question is what chores we're talking about. Are they normal chores like sweep up and you can have $5, or are we talking about something slightly more nefarious in the way of chores that will earn you money, given the proposition that Jarvis made during the birthday party in 2022? Cordell said that he never saw Naziah alone at the shop prior to the 9th of January. She would usually have her cousin with her. And that on the 9th of January, around lunchtime, we also had evidence from a lunch lady at the school who spoke to Naziah every day. And in her opinion, on the 9th of January, Naziah seemed down and not herself. So we have two teachers or staff at the school verifying that Naziah was upset or down and not herself on the 9th of January whilst she was at school. Now, Annette's two other children who she adopted go to after school club, and she collects them from the after school club after work. And that used to be true of Naziah as well, but she had recently removed Naziah from the after school club. And in her evidence, she said that it was because she was having an issue with another girl who attended. At 2:40 p.m. that day, Naziah finishes school. She leaves and gets on the school bus as usual. And there is a still photograph from the school bus that's been published and is widely available that shows Naziah sat on the school bus wearing her Rugrats puffer jacket. And that CCTV inside the bus was shown at the preliminary hearing. Now, the bus driver gave evidence that she got off the bus at Cornwall and 3 Mile, as usual, and that's also corroborated by the CCTV from the bus. And then at 2:54 p.m, there is video footage captured of Naziah walking through the neighbourhood after getting off the school bus. And in fact, it's very close to where she got off the school bus. It's captured by a house at the corner of Cornwall Street and Bedford. And you can see that Naziah has on light blue jeans and Rugrats coat. And that video footage shows that she turned right onto Bedford, not left towards their home. So what happened after school, after Naziah got off that bus and was never seen by her family again? So we need to go back first of all to the evidence of Cordell Wright. And he told the court that he and Jarvis had driven to AutoZone to pick up a water pump. And then when they were returning to the shop, they realised that they'd forgotten something that they needed to purchase at AutoZone. So they turned around, went back to get it. And then on the way back to the shop, Jarvis spotted his niece, Naziah. Now, Jarvis was driving at the time his own truck, which is an Escalade. And they pulled into Angel's liquor store, which is on Harper, and Naziah hopped in the truck. And when they got back to the shop, Cordell began to work on the red Jaguar that belonged to his son's maternal grandmother. Jarvis and Naziah stayed in the truck for a little while. Naziah had gotten into the front seat of the truck, and the truck was running because it was such a cold day to keep warm. And she was playing on her cell phone, is the evidence of Cordell. Now, no cell phone was ever recovered of Naziah's. Whilst they were sat in it, the truck ran out of gas. So Jarvis and Cordell pushed it across to the Citgo gas station, which is on the same plot. And at that point, Cordell asked Jarvis if he was going to drop Naziah off because she was distracting him from work. And Jarvis's response was simply no. Between 4 and 6:30, Jarvis's sister, Tijuana Butts, testified that she was at the shop because Jarvis had told her to bring her car down and he would look at it for her. And she had to wait until the work on paying customers' cars was completed. So she was sat in her own car waiting for her turn, so to speak. And while she was sat there, she saw a young girl who she is later able to identify as Naziah getting in and out of Jarvis's Escalade. And when she asked Jarvis who the girl was, he said that it was Cordell's niece. And then at 6:38 p.m, and we know the precise time because of cell data, Cordell, Jarvis and Naziah, all three, set off to take the red Jaguar back to its owner in Ypsilanti. Cordell drove Jarvis's Escalade and Jarvis drove the Jaguar and had Naziah as his passenger. And Cordell said that they agreed to drop it off because, firstly, it's his son's maternal grandmother, and secondly, because they'd fixed the vehicle before and it had only worked for a short time and then broken down again. And it had then cost the owner a small fortune to get it towed to the shop. So he was being nice by agreeing to return it. And they got there at 7:02 in the evening. And at the address were the owner and Talisha Moore, who is Cordell Wright's son's auntie. And she gave evidence that the three arrived at the property and all came in so that Cordell could tell the owner what he'd done, what had been wrong, and talk about payment. The two men had sat on one settee. Talisha and her mother had sat on the other settee, and Naziah had sat on a chair next to the TV. She'd been offered a drink, declined, and that Jarvis had introduced her as his niece. And then at 7:22 p.m., which the estimates by both Cordell and Talisha Moore are not accurate, but we know from cell data at 7:22 p.m. the three left the address in Ypsilanti and drove back to the shop, and they arrived back at 8:28 p.m. Cordell thought that it was around 8:45 because it was very close to his curfew of 9 p.m. So he needed to get home. But what happened when they arrived back at the shop was that Cordell and Jarvis went into the back of the shop to split the money, the earnings from the day, which was what they did every day, and then Naziah stayed sat in the Escalade. Now, after they'd divvied up the earnings, Cordell left to get home in time for his curfew, and at that point Jarvis and Naziah were alone at the shop. Cell data shows that between 8:48 and 8:59, Jarvis is at his home address at Wilshire. And that's where he lives with one of his girlfriends, Angel. At 9 o'clock, he then goes to Latricia Johnson's house and he borrows her blue Nissan Sentra. He does a car swap, so he leaves the Escalade with her. Neither girl give evidence that Naziah was with Jarvis at these visits. And he told Latricia that he was taking his son somewhere, which is why he needed the car. Now, Latricia lives about 5 minutes from the shop, and so he was back by 9:05. And then at 9:30 p.m, Jarvis checks into the Park Crest Motel, which is at 20,000 Harper. Now, there is a travel-in directly across from the auto shop. That is not the correct hotel. I know that there has been a lot of confusion on various platforms, but if you listen to the evidence in the trial, which gives the address specifically as 20,000 Harper, and then you look on Google Maps for that address, it shows the Park Crest Motel. The travel-in is a totally different address. There is information from one of Naziah's relatives, Roxy, that there is camera footage of Naziah arriving at the Park Crest Motel with Jarvis, but not of her leaving. If that does exist, it hasn't been made public. So I can't corroborate whether or not Naziah arrived with him. We simply know that he checked in at 9:30 p.m. But it would make sense that she was with him at that time. Jarvis is said by locals on social media to regularly visit that motel with women and girls. So it may be that with the disappearance of the CCTV for the time frame when he was leaving with Nazir, if that is the case, could have been procured by him, given that he is a regular customer and that he knows that they let him take young girls there on a regular basis. And then between 10:52 p.m. and 37 minutes past midnight, his cell data shows Jarvis at the motel. So now let's jump into the 10th of January. Oh, for heck's sake. Moving into the early hours of the next morning, so that's the 10th of January of 2024. At 1:11 in the morning, Jarvis's cell pings at a property on East Alexandrine, where it's likely he went to see Regine Rushing, another of his girlfriends. There's then a gap in the information, and we jumped to 8 to 8:30 a.m. when Jarvis returns to Latricia's home and swaps the blue Nissan Sentra he'd borrowed for his Escalade that he had left with Latricia. Now, one might ask the question, why would somebody, either during the commission of offence or straight afterwards, particularly a serious offence like unaliving a person, they might borrow somebody else's vehicle? And I think that it's reasonably common sense to consider the possibility that borrowing a vehicle from somebody else is an attempt to derail any later investigation into the offence, because the vehicle won't be linked to the offender as far as the police are concerned. So they can dispose of evidence, or, even though it's heartbreaking to say it, a body. And the forensic imprint of that element of the clean-up will be in a vehicle that isn't linked to the offender. So I would posit that that's the most likely reason that Jarvis borrowed that Nissan Sentra. In any event, he gave it back at 8 to 8:30 in the morning. Cordell Wright gave evidence at the hearing that Jarvis didn't go into work on the 10th of January, but Latricia gave evidence that she went to his workplace after the school day had finished so that he could see his daughter. So there is contradictory evidence there. It wasn't really unravelled at the preliminary hearing. That will be something for the trial, but it's just worth noting there's a contradiction in the evidence there between the two witnesses. Although, given what Latricia goes on to say about that visit, I would suggest that that's quite an unusual element of a story to make up in any way, and so it's likely to be reliable from the point of view that it would be very difficult to know that there was a reason to make up a story about glasses. Cordell may have been referring simply to the morning, that he didn't come in the morning, so we don't know at this point. Now, On the morning of the 10th of January, Naziah has now been missing since 3 o'clock the previous day, as far as Annette Harris, her main caregiver, is concerned. She goes to the school, not to the police, but to the school, and she speaks to them about the fact that Naziah is missing. And they contact the Detroit School Police Department, and one of their officers, Derek Wolf, came to the school and spoke to Annette between 11 and 12 in the morning. And he took a report from her, and he and his colleague, following that, did some very basic investigations. They spoke to teachers, Naziah's friends, the school bus driver. They obtained the CCTV from the school bus and also from the property at the corner of Cornwall and Bedford. The difficulty here is that the school police did not report this to the Detroit Police Department or hand it over to them until a month later. The school were treating her as a runaway initially, and I think it's fair to say that so were the family. And I say that because, straying from the preliminary hearing, on social media, Annette and Shannon have described Naziah as fast, which is a ridiculous thing to call a 13-year-old who has been groomed and abused. And they said that, having watched Vari, her older brother, run away the year before, she knew what to do. And I've got a couple of things to say about that. Number one, that's 2 children in the space of a year, as far as they're concerned, that have run away. So Child Protective Services and the police should be looking at, why are they running away? What is it about that household that makes it that the children do not want to be there? And the other element of that is that just because she watched her brother run away does not mean that that's what has happened to Naziah. And she is a slightly different personality than her brother. We know that she's a diligent student who works hard and never misses school. So I think it was a serious misstep on the part of not just the family, but the school police service as well. The prosecutor, Kim Worthy, was really clear during the press conference that she holds very strong views about the fact that the school police should have contacted the Detroit Police Department immediately. And I think that's accurate when you consider the fact that we hear time and time again the first 24 hours in a missing child case are crucial to the investigation. Now, the Chief of Police at the press conference did say that, given the information that they have and the evidence that they have, it's unlikely it would have made a difference to the outcome for Naziah. What it would have done was make investigating her disappearance and building a case against any perpetrator of a crime much, much easier. Going back to the 10th of January, midday, 12 o'clock, Jarvis Butts checks out of the Park Crest Motel. Now, it's not clear if this is him physically doing a checkout or whether it's an automated checkout because he'd not done so. I am aware that many hotels do that at a certain time if you've not done so, and there's usually a key drop box that you can just throw your key in as you leave. A local person did state on social media that she's been to that motel on a number of occasions, and they do automatically check out at noon. That's not verified. And I am aware that Gisela from Grizzly True Crime did contact the motel, but they weren't particularly forthcoming with information for her. The local person did also say that there are cameras in that motel and there should be footage of the comings and goings of Jarvis and potentially Naziah. And they also indicated that some of the staff are very strict, but others not so much. And other people have commented on social media that Jarvis regularly took young girls to that hotel, and women for that matter. So after school on the 10th of January, Latricia gave evidence that she picked up her son from school and then she went to the shop so that Jarvis could see his 2-year-old daughter that they share. When she pulled up at the shop, her son was in the back seat, and while she was stood outside the car, she noticed that he was playing with a pair of glasses, and she took them off him. And Jarvis saw them and snatched them from her, which she gave evidence shocked at how aggressively he did that. And he said that they were his son's glasses. During the preliminary hearing, Latricia was shown a selfie of Naziah from the 9th of January, the one that she took on the school tablet. And she said that the glasses were very similar, if not the same. So it's highly likely that they were Naziah's glasses. That gives an indication Naziah had been in that vehicle the night before. And that goes back to my point around Jarvis doing a clean-up process, and Naziah seemed to have her glasses on a lot of the time, and so the fact that they're discarded in the car lends weight to the fact that she wasn't conscious or potentially alive at the time that she was in that vehicle. The police did not go into detail about any forensic work that was done on that vehicle or evidence around how the body was disposed of. So that may come out at the trial, or it may be that that information is missing from their timeline of events. When Jarvis was speaking to Latricia, he asked if he could borrow the car again and said that he wouldn't be as long this time. And in fact, he did borrow it, and it was for about 2 to 3 hours. And again, he said that he needed to take his son somewhere. Now, it isn't clear why he would need a car rather than his Escalade to take his son somewhere. Also, there is some lack of reliability in relation to when that second incident of borrowing the car took place, because Latricia wasn't sure whether it was the 10th or the 11th of January, but she believes that it was the 10th. And that would make sense because she'd already spoken to him on that day, and it's likely she would remember that they were separate incidents if it was the 11th. There's then a gap. So Latricia takes Jarvis's daughter to see him straight after school, and then we jump to 10:51 p.m. and Jarvis's cell data shows that he arrives at Greenfield and 7 Mile in that area. Now we know that Latasha, one of his other girlfriends, lives there, so it's likely that he was visiting her, and it seems to me that he will have been attempting to build an alibi by being seen with as many of his girlfriends as possible. And then between 11:40 and 1:34 a.m. the following day, so the 11th of January, Jarvis is seen via his cell data at 7 Mile and Berg, which is an area comprising of a disused golf course, a wooded area, a large parking lot, and the Rouge River. Now, he was there for 2 hours, which would lead one to believe that he wasn't simply discarding of the clothing that was later found there, but that there was more activity taking place. On the 7th of February, Jarvis hands himself in on a warrant in relation to a weapons charge, and that means that he will be in custody until December of 2024. Now, that's the same warrant that he attempted to hand himself in relation to on the 9th of January, but it was deferred. And we know from Tashiana Davis's evidence at the hearing that she dropped him off at court in her 2005 tan Suburban. Now, at an unspecified time after he handed himself in, there was a jail call where Jarvis asks Cordell Wright to go and speak to Tasha to check if the missing phone was in her back seat. Now, he doesn't describe what the missing phone is, that's how he describes it. So, is that his phone, or is it Naziah's phone? I think it later comes to light that it's his phone. Now, the evidence that Cordell gave was that he acted upon that. He got Tasha to bring the Suburban to the shop, and he searched but couldn't find the phone. Tashiana Davis gave evidence that nobody had asked her to bring the car to the shop. She hadn't spoken to Cordell about it. So that may be Cordell simply trying to stay in favour with Jarvis, but not acting on his request. The police had that call, and so the car was the subject of a search warrant, and they indeed found the phone. On the 12th of February of 2024, the Detroit Police Department get involved in the investigation. So they came to it really late in the day, but they still got enough evidence together to charge Jarvis, and I think that speaks volumes about the effort that they put in. But think about all of the times that you hear the police talk about the first 24 hours after someone goes missing being crucial. A month later means that their investigation was certainly hindered. On the 14th of February of 2024, the police held a press conference where they asked for the public's help to find Naziah or information about what had happened to her. And on the 7th of March, Naziah's school ID card was found by a lady called Valerie Smith on St. Martin's and Evergreen, opposite her house, next to a patch of grass. And she gave evidence at the hearing that she'd stepped over it or past it for a couple of weeks, but on this particular day felt compelled to pick it up. She described picking it up by the very edges so that she wouldn't contaminate any fingerprints. She turned it over and recognised Naziah from the news, so she contacted the police, handed it over to them and showed them exactly where she'd found it. And then on the 12th of March, extensive searches were carried out. Throughout the period, in fact, from the 12th of February onwards, by law enforcement, and it included land, sea and air, or water, and heat-seeking sonar, cadaver dogs, tracking dogs, various law enforcement departments from across the US. There was a lot of resource put in to the searches, but on the 12th of March, law enforcement commenced a search in and around the Rouge River. And this is the area in particular that Jarvis's cell pinged for that 2-hour period near 7 Mile and Berg. Now, the search included divers, drones, helicopters, tracking dogs, cadaver dogs, state park police, Detroit Police Department, federal police and Oakland County sheriffs. There were a number of bodies of water searched, river banks and wooded areas over the next few days. And on the 14th of March, a member of law enforcement found clothing in that area at 7 Mile and Berg on the banks of the Rouge River, and it included Nike trainers. These were white, red and black. Now, we know that she was reported by Annette as wearing white and blue Nike trainers, but these were identified by her older brother, Tavarius, as belonging to Naziah. And he provided a photograph, and if you're watching on YouTube, you can see an image on the screen there where she's wearing a red tracksuit and she's wearing those particular trainers. There was a black hoodie, identified by Annette as the one that Naziah was wearing on the 9th of January, and it was torn and had holes in particular around the back of the hood and neck area. It was found to contain blood of both Naziah and Jarvis. And there was a pink sleeveless lycra jumpsuit that had Naziah's DNA on it. And that had one trainer rolled up inside it as though the whole thing had been pulled off in a hurry. And the other trainer was close by. One question that's bothered me, and no doubt it's bothered others as well, is where did this pink jumpsuit come from? Because she wasn't never described as wearing it, and she wasn't seen on any CCTV wearing it. I think there are a couple of options. One is that she got changed into it during the period after school finished while she was in the company of Jarvis, or she had it on under her clothes to keep her baby bump compressed and smoothed out during the school day, or even just as an extra base layer because it was very cold at that point. In April of 2024, Jarvis was charged with 2 counts of SA in the second degree on a 7-year-old girl. He pleaded not guilty, and he was held at that point in Wayne County Jail on a bond of $250,000. But we know that he wasn't going anywhere in any event until December of 2024 because of the warrant in relation to the weapons charges. And then on the 27th of September of 24, there was another police press conference. And it was confirmed that Jarvis was being charged with Nazia's unaliving and also her SA between September of 2022 and January of 2024. But it went further than that. He was also charged with the SA of 2 further minor victims, and the prosecutor outlined those matters as this. So between April of 2012 and April of 2014, there were alleged assaults on a girl who is now aged 20. So at the time, she'd have been between 8 and 10 years of age. And in relation to that conduct, he was charged with 1 first-degree criminal sexual conduct in relation to a girl under 13. And I'm going to say SA in relation to the description of that charge from here on in, to avoid breaching YouTube's rules, and 3 second-degree charges of SA on a girl under 13. And then in relation to the other child, between July of 2015 and July of 2017, there were alleged assaults on a girl now 13 years of age. So at the time, she'd have been between 4 and 6 years of age. 4 and 6. That absolutely blows my mind. And I know that there was a previous allegation about a 4-year-old that Jarvis had given chlamydia. But good grief. So in relation to those offences, he was charged with 1 second-degree SA of a girl under 13. So that in total is 4 people who he currently faces charges about. The 7-year-old, the girl who was between 4 and 6 at the time, the girl who was between 8 and 10 at the time, Naziah. We also know that there was a CPS referral in 2015, 1 in 2018, and that he was convicted in 2005. So this man is a prolific predator. The prosecutor went on to say during that press conference that Jarvis targeted and befriended women to have sexual contact with their daughters. He would have relationships with the women, but his true desire was their young daughters. He is a classic and expert groomer and PDF file. And I agree with her sentiments wholeheartedly. Following those charges being laid against Jarvis, he's now being held in Wayne County Jail with no bond. Thank heavens for that. He needs to never see the light of day again. And of course, he is innocent until proven guilty in relation to all of these charges. But I think that a conviction is highly likely given the level of evidence that came to light in the preliminary hearing. On the 13th of January of 2005, there was another police press conference where they indicated that they had found remains in a backyard on Woodington Drive. Now, at that time, they could only see a foot, and excavation was ongoing. But it later came to light that this wasn't Naziah. It was, in fact, a young boy who, heartbreakingly, nobody was looking for. Now, in January of 2025, 7 Mile Radio and Mark DeAndre, along with a family member of Naziah, Roxy Rocks, provided some information which I can't verify. This is social media information, but it does include a family member of Naziah, and that's why I'm including the information. So she indicated that there had been a recent jail call in which Jarvis had alleged that it was in fact Shannon who had unalived Naziah. Now, during that live stream, Shannon's twin sister Marquita's boyfriend, along with Roxy and Mark D, confronted Marquita and Shannon. At that time, Shannon and her children were staying with Marquita and her boyfriend and Marquita's children. And the boyfriend was still living there, but the relationship had ended. During the live, Shannon and Marquita were in the bedroom, sat on a mattress on the floor. The house was very sparse in terms of furniture, and they then came out of the bedroom, and Shannon had a conversation with Roxy, and that was picked up on the live stream. And during that conversation, Shannon indicated that she had been asked by Naziah for a pregnancy test. She'd given it to her, and Naziah had told her that there were 2 lines, but one was very faint. And Shannon had told Naziah that that meant it was negative. Now, anybody who's taken a pregnancy test knows that that's not true. A faint line is still a line, and it means you're pregnant. Shannon doesn't indicate when that happened during the conversation, but that is in direct contradiction to the evidence she gave in the preliminary hearing. And I just want to kind of analyse the situation that's arisen there, because Roxy and Mark are coming at this from the right place. They want justice for Naziah. They've both done a lot of work to keep Naziah's name in the public domain, but this live stream went a little too far, in my opinion, and the reason is this. I understand that people want to demonstrate that Shannon, Marquita and Annette hold some level of culpability for what happened to Naziah. They failed her. I understand that. But they confronted somebody who is an ongoing witness in a criminal investigation. And we have to bear in mind the main perpetrator in this case is Jarvis. Bringing him to justice is the most important element of this case. Discrediting one of the prosecution witnesses against him could later impact on the proceedings and result in the trial not reaching the outcome that we all want. So I appreciate where the sentiment came from, but I would urge anybody, please don't speak directly to prosecution witnesses and highlight inconsistencies in their material, because you could impact on the ongoing proceedings. Evidence also came to light on social media, so again, I can't verify it, that during the weekend of the 25th and 26th of January, Child Protective Services removed Shannon's children. I'm pretty certain that they didn't remove Annette's children, because I've seen video footage of them captured shopping where the children are with her after this time frame. And I don't know one way or the other about Marquita's children. So that is the timeline so far as we know it. What we'll do next is take a real deep dive into the evidence that was given during the preliminary hearing, who said what and why,